Welcome back to Is She a Prophet? This is a video series where we dive deep into the life of Ellen White from a historical standpoint and see, by examining her works, if she really is a prophet. My name is Angel, and welcome back. I have been gone for quite a few weeks, and I apologize for my short hiatus from this series. I originally intended to make this series and release it over the course of a few weeks to a few months, but life has had other plans. I really didn't budget my time out well, and so what happened was I ended up in nursing school. With that comes a lot more homework than I was budgeting for, and so I did not account for that. And so I've been very, very busy trying to stay on top of school. Additionally, I have a kid now. So you might hear him cooing in the background. I'm on baby duty today. So anyways, that's the explanation for why I haven't made anything recently. I am on spring break, summer break right now. I will be starting the summer semester here pretty soon. So I'm going to try to make a few videos just to hold us over until this semester can be done with and I can finish out the series. So this may take a little bit longer than I anticipated for, and I apologize for that, but I also appreciate your patience and you sitting through this and viewing this. This is our fourth video in the series, and today we're going to be talking about Ellen White and the early church, how the early Adventist church comes to be, the foundation, how alliances are made within that church, and how the church starts to grow. We're not going to get into when the church officially becomes recognized as an official Seventh-day Adventist church, because that will occur in 1863 when Abraham Lincoln will put in place the draft, and the Adventist church will formulate in response to that to try to protect their members from being drafted into the Civil War. So that is going to come in the fifth video. The video right after this is going to go in and we're going to spend time in the Civil War and slavery and that whole topic. But for this video, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how we started off and how we ended up as an Adventist church, how they weathered the storm of whether or not Ellen White is prophetic or not. So the early church is a group of Millerites. They don't have a church anymore. The great disappointment has happened. It's come and gone. And so a lot of the Millerites have returned back to their former churches, be it Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, what have you. They've returned back, except for a select few. Some may say they'd be more radical. Maybe, maybe not. There were definitely, as we saw in video 3, some very radical people that were part of the group, and there may have been some people who weren't as radical. They will start congregating together and basically in small house churches, and they have a lot of autonomy. There's not a lot of organization in that setup. And so for Ellen and James White to climb the ranks of the Millerites and for the church to really come out as a Seventh-day Adventist church and to really start assembling, it really begins with the printing the publications that we looked at, like for example, A Little Word to the Flock or A Word to the Small Flock. That magazine or article that was distributed by Ellen White, or by James White. I apologize, I'm a little rusty on that. In order for them to really rise and become more recognized among the Millerites that are left, they really need to become friends with and be endorsed by a man by the name of Joseph Bates. Joseph Bates is an old sea captain, a retired sea captain, and he is one of those early Millerite individuals. He invested a lot of time and a lot of his fortune into the Millerite movement with the belief that Jesus was going to be returning. And he's a very popular name among the Millerites. If they can get an endorsement from him, then this really just helps put Ellen White out there and put her work out there as a prophet. And so for the record, Joseph Bates is not a believer that Ellen White is divinely inspired. He believes that she is sincere. He believes that she has a vivid imagination, but he is not convinced that she is divinely inspired. Her visions are just the product of a wild imagination, according to him. And he maintains that stance. So how do you sway somebody like this? It's interesting to know that as an old sea captain, Joseph Bates is a very avid astronomer. He loves studying the stars, loves studying the planets, and he'll make a habit of pointing out these planets and these celestial bodies at night to his friends and family when they're over at his house. Whenever they're hanging out, he will actually go outside and show them different bodies in the sky. And so very much this is his thing. He's an avid astronomer. Ellen White, on the other hand, is not. She has no interest in it. That all being said, very conveniently in the 1840s, I believe it's 1846, 1847, she will have a vision of traveling to different planets in the solar system that will confirm her to Joseph Bates, and it will be God's sign to Joseph Bates saying, hey, she is divinely inspired, because if she didn't know anything about astronomy and she's just describing what she's seeing now, then obviously God God is behind this. And so as silly as that sounds, she goes into vision. Ironically, this is the only vision she has for as far as planetary exploration. And it ironically happens very coincidentally in the presence of Joseph Bates. And that's where it gets interesting. So she has this vision and she's traveling around. She's in this trance, walking around the room as if she were traveling through space. Now, I don't know what that looks like, but that is what she does in this room, and she describes this big, beautiful planet with 4 moons. And 4 moons was a very big thing in the 1840s because back in the 1840s, Jupiter was believed to only have 4 moons. We now know that there's a lot more than that, but back then, that is what was known. And so when she said this, Joseph Bates exclaims, wow, she's seeing the planet Jupiter, and she's describing it from outer space. And then she turns in her vision and she sees this beautiful planet with rings around it. It has 7 or 8 moons, and he will say, wow, she's describing Saturn. And then she'll turn again and she'll see another planet that has 6 moons, and he will say, wow, that must be, she's watching Uranus. And so she will go through this, and then she will come out of the vision, and what Bates will ask her is, well, have you ever read astronomy? Have you ever done anything like that? And she says, no, I haven't. And this, for Joseph Bates, is confirmation that this is divinely inspired. Now, the interesting part is the number of moons. We know that Saturn has well over 70 plus moons. I've not checked today, but I believe that we're actually in the hundreds, if I'm correct. And then Uranus also has a lot more than 6 moons. The interesting part of this is that the moon quantities that she gives for the time correlate with what is believed. So in the 1840s, Jupiter only had 4 moons. And so they weren't, like the 5th moon of Jupiter wasn't discovered until 1892. In 1905, moons 6 and 7 are found. In 1808, the 8th moon is found. In 1914, the 9th moon is found. In the 1940s, even more moons are found, etc. Saturn, very similar as well. We find a 9th moon in 1899, a 10th moon in 1905. And for Uranus, we also find some more stuff later on down the road. And so it's very interesting that this vision is what confirms her. And this really causes a lot of doubt, especially in my mind when I look at this, because if God is revealing this to her, she really is out in space, she would have predicted more moons to be seen for sure. And so I think also the more compelling testimony is going to be from a Mrs. Truesdale. And so I'm going to read directly from her letter because I don't want to parse any words that she talks about. This is her account. She was an eyewitness of this vision where Joseph Bates is in attendance. And her testimony is the following. We soon noticed that she was insensible to earthly things. She being Ellen White, this is her going into vision. This was her first view of the planetary world. After counting aloud the moons of Jupiter, and soon after those of Saturn, she gave a beautiful description of the rings of the latter. She then said, quote, "The inhabitants are a tall, majestic people, so unlike the inhabitants of Earth. Sin has never entered here." This is inevitably enough for Joseph Bates to be sold on her idea. So her only prediction in this whole vision is that there are tall, majestic people, unlike the inhabitants of Earth, living in Saturn. We now know with satellites and data that the liquid hydrogen on Saturn would make it inhabitable for any life forms. So that's a very interesting point to bring up, that she would make that prediction and it would come out false. You also have to keep in mind that Jupiter also has some rings, not as prominent as Saturn. They didn't see those in the 1840s either. Same thing as Uranus. Uranus also has rings, also not brought up. So what we're going to start seeing with her ministry is a lot of the visions that she will have are not visions of prediction, but they are more, as I would call, a vision of current societal revelation. In other words, whatever the societal norm is, and Ellen White believes is the truth, she will have a vision about that. And so it becomes very dependent and very relative to Ellen White and where she's at in her life and where she wants to be. And we will see that especially in our next video when we get into the Civil War and the reform dress and things like that, where a lot of her revelations are based on current events and societal norms that will be found to be false. Without any further ado on that subject, we're going to go ahead and move on to what happens in the later parts of this time period. So now we're going to fast forward. This is the late 1840s, right? We're now going to fast forward into the late 1850s. This is where the Adventist churches, they're now referred to as Seventh-day Adventists. They are not officially, they don't have an official creed. They're not officially established just yet, but they do have a conference president. So they do have some sort of structure. And what I'm really going to address is something that happens with an individual by the name of Mr. Gilbert Cranmer. In 1858, Mr. Gilbert Cranmer is a pastor for the Adventist Church, or for the group of Seventh-day Adventists, and he will be making a stop in his city, in a town called Otsego, Michigan, and speaking at that church. And what he is speaking, and the audience he's speaking to is an Adventist audience, and he's in his sermon, what he will bring out is that there is no support, there is no biblical support. Well, he doesn't say there's no biblical support. He says there is no support, period, for the shut door doctrine that Ellen White had talked about, the Adventist Church had talked about back in the 1844-1845 time period. Again, this has now been 15, 16 years since all that, so that rhetoric, that conversation has kind of gone away, and so he's just now saying, look, there's no merit to this. He will be approached after that service by an earnest churchgoer who will stop him and say, hey, we do have evidence that this actually did happen. We do have something to go off of. Gilbert Cranmer will look at the guy and say, well, based upon what? And the guy will pull out one of Ellen White's writings. And I don't want to misquote Mr. Cranmer, so I'm going to quote from his own response. He answers to this guy. He says, quote, perhaps Mrs. White's visions are proof to you, but they are not to me. And so this shows a split in the church, even with the pastors, of some people believing that Ellen White is prophetic and some believing that she is not. And so this conversation obviously drives a pretty good wedge in between the church, because now, especially if you're an Adventist or a Millerite, if you will, now you have to now explain what happened in 1844, because we were all convinced that that was the shut door theory, or the shut door doctrine. So I will be right back, because it seems like Atlas needs a little bit of attention right now.
A few moments later.
So Mr. Gilbert Cranmer has this discussion. He says this about Ellen White, and this sends shockwaves throughout that congregation, and it will get back to James White very quickly. And James White's response is to bar this minister from speaking again in an Adventist church. Just like that, this guy's not allowed to speak anymore. When he leaves, there will be a number of congregations that will leave with him, and they will form the Church of God's Seventh Day. And so for now, it seems like the question about Ellen White has been stifled, it's been answered wrong. In 1860, the church will experience what is called the Marian Rebellion. And this is not as glamorous as it sounds. It's not like any Boston Tea Party or some kind of combat-related issue. This is rather the settling of the question of, is Ellen White prophetic or is she not? And so what will happen is this involves a church in Marion, Iowa, where they will receive a publication from the Review and Herald, which is the Adventist media, the Adventist paper, article, booklet, whatever you want to call it. And in there will be a line, a quote, and I don't want to misrepresent the quote, but when referring to Ellen White's visions, it will refer to the visions as being given to correct those who should err from biblical truth or from Bible truth. And so what this does is it puts the congregation in a pickle. Half the congregation will go ahead and accept this. Half the congregation will say, hey, no, that's not true. There's no authority in her writings for us to fall along with this. In order to settle the issue, Elder M.E. Cornell will be sent from the Adventist Conference to go ahead and go to that church and settle the dispute. And the way he does this, as an eyewitness reports, he proclaims that Ellen White's visions are, quote, of equal authority and binding forever with the Bible. He then urges the congregation to adopt the teachings as a rule of faith and discipline. So now Ellen White is officially on par with the Bible, binding forever. So what that does now is that sends shockwaves throughout that congregation, and that congregation also splits. But when this congregation splits, it actually sends shockwaves back to the conference, unlike the first event. And so now the conference secretary and conference president, B.F. Snook, and the secretary, W.H. Brinkerhoff, in 1862, will voice their concerns about Ellen White's authenticity and Ellen White as a prophet of God. They will voice their concerns, and they will be called on the carpet to defend their position, and they will actually end up recanting this because they don't have any hard evidence that shows Ellen White is walking contrary to the Bible. So they will go ahead and recant and go back to everything go back the way it is until 1865, 2 years after the Adventist Church is officially formed. At this point, a little document starts making its rounds around the church, and this document is the Word to the Little Flock that we explored in previous videos, where it shows Ellen White's position as far as the open door of salvation, the shut door of salvation in 1844. Now we have a document that shows clearly Ellen White's position on this as opposed to the current church's position on this. And this shows a contradiction. And so now that they have this, they will approach a man, H.E. Carver. They will make him aware of their findings, and they will present this to the Whites, and they will ask him, okay, at the time was Ellen White a believer that the door of salvation had been closed in 1844. And while hoping for a no, they get a yes. That is what Ellen White believed. And so that drives a wedge in there, and they basically say, hey, look, we cannot confirm that this lady is a prophet if her revelations are changing and the issues that we've discussed in previous videos are happening, and they find a lot of this information. They say, hey, look, we can't keep going with this. And so they will end up, at that point, they will end up splitting from the church, and also some other congregations will follow them as well. And so the survivors, this forever establishes Ellen White as the prophet that she is regarded as today by the Adventist Church. She speaks with prophetic authority, and this is why. And then when they leave, it's very interesting, both the conference president and the secretary, when they leave, they will publish a book, and it becomes a bombshell. It's called The Visions of E.G. White and Not of God. This showed a lot of contradictions and inconsistencies with her visions, and these men will end up leaving, and they will join the Church of God Seventh Day with Mr. Gilbert Cranmer. And so it's very sad to see how this split, she becomes a question of loyalty, a test of faith. And if you're not Adventist if you don't believe in her as a prophet. It's very eye-opening to see how that goes. Later on in future books, if you have the time to read and look through her stuff, you'll see a lot of her books, a lot of her writings, especially in the testimonies, are letters where she will have visions directly against other people or dreams against other people. So somebody will come up to her and oppose her view, and somebody who she once witnessed, as in her books, in her previous writings, she'll witness somebody, like Uriah Smith, for example. She'll rely on him a lot until he opposes her, and the second he opposes her, well, then he's borderline damned of God, and he's going to hell. His name is off the books of life, and it just gets really nasty as she rises in power to this position of prophetic authority. So definitely eye-opening to see the church go through that. I will say this, though, not all churches have a beautiful past. That can be said of the Southern Baptist Convention, of Lutheranism, of several different congregations and denominations. We all have a checkered past. We're all human and we all fail. However, this seems to be something that shows a lot of inconsistency, and really it should challenge the church to re-examine the positioning that we have in Ellen White now that it's been over 100 years ago, 150 years ago. But it's definitely interesting to see how she rose to power, and how with navigating with specific people, gaining popularity, gaining momentum, and to a point where the congregation will accept what she says just because she said it without asking for biblical clearance or God clearance. So thank you for watching this at home or wherever you're at. I appreciate the time you've given me, and stay tuned, because the next video we're going to get into the Civil War and the reform dress, and this is going to show some more of these inconsistencies that I've been talking about. These start to run more hand in hand as the time goes on. So thank you and have a good day.